despair in your life or death or injury, it doesn't matter anymore. It's not that you don't have any fear, it's that you're in so much pain you don't know what you're living for. Pain eventually just leaves you so numbed out, it's not like you're even living. You no longer care what you do or what you don't because you no longer need forgiving. You've crossed into the place where your existence no longer matters. You've been thrown into a deep hole and no one's left you any ladders. You're invisible to all, somehow you faded out of view. And if you looked into a mirror, you'd never know that it was you. You're ready to risk it all because the all you have doesn't add up to much. You've lost everything that could have some meaning and your heart is limping on a crutch. You've been emotionally bleeding out for so long, you look like a walking ghost. You're willing to take all the chances because being dead is what you hope for most. How any given night ends for you can no longer ever shock your mind. You've been inside a world of hurt so long that you finally become blind. And you'll step onto the tightrope hoping this crash will be the last, only to wake up one more time, still stuck in the role that you were cast. Despair having become the lenses that have been grafted to your soul. You have taken on a state of mindlessness because there was no point to have a goal. You no longer care what you say or who you say it to. You don't need to understand the other person's point of view because you don't really exist. You're only a figment of your own painful imagination. When the hurt got bad enough, this was your final graduation. You stepped across the threshold of life into a place of suspended animation. Every day another painful experience with no chance for variation. A living purgatory of sorts, but you no longer remembered your crime. But it must have been pretty bad because it sentenced you to a lifetime of painful time. A death sentence would have been kinder, but there was no kindness offered you. And all for the roll of the dice, you could have held the other person's point of view. You're in a dance of carelessness. It no longer matters what happens now. You seek the numbness of anesthesia, and getting high is your only vow. The only small pity offered you, but it comes with an ugly price. It forces you to sell yourself to the hurt for the relief that continues to entice. You're in a living nightmare, but you cannot awake from the horror of the dream, and no one else can see it because for them it's other than it seems. To them you're the maker of every wrong thing delivered to you, and all the repercussions of your decisions were the reality that you knew. You set it all up and wouldn't deviate despite another's warning, so if you have nothing but grief left over, it's you that chose your mourning. And in the end it no longer matters now because you've lived a long time dead, and the only company you have at night are the bed bugs in the sheltered bed. The blood on the sheets that somehow signals the blood still runs through your veins. The chill of withdrawal that greets your waking, promising another day of pains. As you crawl out of the bed and into the street, as gray as it always seems, because the fog in your mind and the pain in your bones can't tell you where you've been. And again, it just doesn't matter, because there's no one left inside this ghostly apparition. The only dreams left for you to dream is the moment of death's graduation, a chance to lay this empty vessel down and the never-ending weight that it's carried. Time to break the bonds of pain and all the sadness that you married. And no one stops to ask where the child you once were went, or how that child got so lost that it was only to hell that they were sent. No one cares to find the person that committed the crime at your disposal, or ever lament for the young woman who never got to hear a proposal. Any children you birthed long lost in the placement system, and like you never kept long enough to develop some resilience or some wisdom. The spawning of a never-ending cycle of rejection and despair. They can never produce a happy ending, only one more that is unfair. And no one understands this because they're all too busy judging you, and they don't want to know the truth because they couldn't handle it if they knew. Because it's the saddest tale there is to tell, but it never will be told. Because we're all too busy excluding you and leaving you somewhere in the cold. We have to believe you chose this mess so we can walk by and ignore you. It's easier than considering whether there's still some way to restore you. But I have seen the empty stare with their never-ending depths of pain. And every time we walk by you, we only increase the darkness of the stain. And every time we walk by you, one more piece of our humanity dies. And we all learn to hide the ugly truth behind one more of our lies, where we turn our victims into perpetrators who eventually bite us back. And we can't understand why they don't shut up, despite everything they lack. And when we find them dead on the street, we blame them for their end. And the papers call them a crackhead hooker, because that's the message they want to send. We don't want to know that a child had died, but it took 20 years to lay her down. And when they found her on the street, it was only an empty carcass that they found, eaten up from within by the poison of the cruelty of too many others, left abandoned in a darkened pit with other discarded sisters and their brothers. The largest crime committed by us, when we choose an inaction as a policy, when we claim forever that we don't know, but we chose to be too blind to see, when the politics of money will cut all the corners that we can, and then they claim that they're there for the people, but they don't even know how to be human, because no one deserves to die on the street like yesterday's forgotten trash, all because we don't spend the money. They'll die for a lack of cash, in an atmosphere that paints the victim with an ugly shade of hate, and then leaves them discarded on the street to an ugly kind of fate.